Hi there and thanks for joining me. Today's tutorial is for this purple hued Fright Halloween card. It's based on one that's very similar that I had posted in some of the Facebook card groups I belong to. This particular one, it's green, and Kathy B asked me if I would do a tutorial for it, and so here you go, Kathy. Here's your tutorial. And that large bat on the front I just want to show has got some great dimension. So the dies that I used for this one, there's several small bats I used. They came from the Mixed Media Halloween die set by Tim Holtz, Sizzix. And of course you could use something very similar if you've got other dies. That's for bats, that's great. And I used a little bit of black cardstock for that. And for the edges, I used a crochet die, also Sizzix Tim Holtz. I used the small version of the scallop die, and for that I used a couple of pieces of 1-inch strips of the paper, which I'll show you in a moment, the cardstock. And there's also this Fright die, which comes from the Vintage Spirits die set. And the final is the large bat, and that comes from the Geo Halloween die set. Again, it's a Tim Holtz product from Sizzix. And yeah, great die. And of course, if you've got another large bat that you'd like to use, I'm sure it would work very well. I cut that also from a 1-inch strip of the metallic paper. So here's that light purple for the crochet die. It comes from the Metallic Confections craft cardstock collection by Tim Holtz. And the black for the bat, the large bat, comes from the Metallic Jewels. It's also a craft cardstock collection by Tim Holtz. The background and the Fright die are going to be cut from this photo quality paper, and I'll be using alcohol ink on it. What I've done is taken an 8.5 by 11-inch piece, cut it in 4, so you get 4 5.5 by 4.25 pieces. I'll use 2 of those, and I use the Kirkland brand of the photo quality paper from Costco because there's no printing on the matte side, and that's what I'll be using. Those were just pieces of deco foil or craft foil that I'll be using. I always keep the leftover foil until the foil color disappears entirely. I just keep the leftovers in a little bag, so I thought purple on purple would be kind of cool. And I'm going to die cut the bat. And by the way, if listening tutorials not your thing, there's a volume button. You just turn that right down and just watch as I go. I'm sure you'll know everything there is to know already. And if not, and you don't want to watch me, well, then you can just listen and turn around or turn down your monitor. And of course, if you've done die cutting before and this is all old hat, then you've got the fast forward. So I just showing here that, as with all dies, but I'm using some intricate ones here, you want to make sure that the back has cut right through. So this one worked really well. I take out my little pokey tool, I poke out all those little bits and pieces. I discard them in this case. Sometimes I'll keep them. If I'm going to keep them and use them in another project, it's usually because I've die cut twice, particularly these Geo dies, and I switch out the centers. So it takes a little bit of logistics. You have to pop them out onto a piece of sticky tape or something so that you can retrieve them and put them back in place like a mosaic, but we're not going to do that here. In this case, we're just going to remove those center bits and discard them. So as I pointed out earlier, if die cutting is old hat to you, well, just fast forward because there's going to be a bit of die cutting just so that we can get the bat and then the 2 crochet pieces started. There, that turned out very nicely. And so the crocheted pieces I'm going to use, and just showing, by the way, that's why I use the metallic cardstock, because it makes the bat very bendable and it retains the shape. So again, I've taken now 2 strips, but of the light purple from the Convections craft cardstock, metallic cardstock, and I'm going to cut out the scalloped crochet die. I'm only going to use 3 of the scallops of the 4. I could have slid it right down so that only 3 of them were on top of the metallic cardstock, and then saved what was left over because these are 8-inch strips. The pad I just showed you is 8 by 8. So again, I just cut off a 1-inch strip And this is super wasteful for, but it's okay. It's worth it for the tutorial. But I've got the die right in the very center. And as I said, I could probably just have die cut 3 scallops because that's what will fit on either end of the card. And just to show you there, it was a little bit hard getting it off and some of the bits fell out. And I should have used a little pair of snips. It didn't hurt it, but I realized as I was going on and that it didn't cut through very well, and I had to recut it. So I placed those back into the die individually. I, with a little bit of tape holding them in place, ran them through and poked out hundreds of those little bits of those beautiful dies. But that's what I did, and I stopped video for that, so I won't put you through that. But the next one I'm doing is those little bats. I only use 3 of them, so if I wanted to, I could have used a piece of cardstock that really the die would cover completely. I didn't. I just, again, just sort of ran it through so that I could get my 3 plus another probably 15 little bats, and the extras that I don't use, and it cut nicely. The extras I don't use, I will put aside into a little container I have with Halloween extras, bibbles and bobs, and I go to that little container if I'm going to be making any Halloween cards or projects, because I can often find things like these great little bats, and I will use them all. So not to bore you too much, but really, as you can see, a couple of them fell out. I'm just going to go back very quickly with that pokey tool. If you don't have one of these pokey tools, they're amazing. Some people buy dental tools, if I understand, which I guess are really great too, but this happens to be a crafting tool that came with a Cricut, which is a die cutting machine. And so there we have our little stockpile of bats, and that's ready. And so the next stage is to see what I'm going to do here is to get the die cutting machine out of the way and give myself a clean space again. And so this is the first piece of the matte side, not the shiny side, of that 4¼ by 5½ photo quality paper. I'm using 91% isopropyl alcohol, also known as rubbing alcohol, and I've put it in that little quilling bottle. And this is Art C brand alcohol ink, and the color is purple. It's a beautiful color. All of their, I mean, their dyes or rather their inks are really gorgeous. So I sprayed on, or applied a little bit of alcohol, a fair bit, onto the back of the piece of the photo quality paper so that I could drop those few drops of the purple ink, and that's the only color I'm going to be using for the background. And so what I'm doing here is trying to keep my fingers and hands out of the ink because it'll leave fingerprints. The shiny side of this photo quality paper, which is what's laying on my hand, actually sticks to my hand quite well. So I don't feel I need anything to do this, but really, as you can see, I'm just letting gravity do its thing. And so what I want is the effect of the purple going all over this particular piece. I want it to leave some light spots and dark spots. I grabbed a straw there, by the way. You can sort of see it. It's mostly off screen. And I apologize for going outside of the camera view there for a moment, but what I was doing was blowing the ink around. You can see now that it's broken down a bit. It's got some really nice different hues to it, really quite beautiful. You could leave the white spaces if you want. In this particular project, I want them to be all purple. Even very light purple's fine. And most of the time when I'm doing these pieces, I kind of contemplate my navel as I just sit and allow it to move around. I generally don't expedite the ink. I do, like I'm doing here, occasionally add some isopropyl alcohol. And by the way, blending solution, which you'll see me use later, probably would have been a better call for this particular project, because blending solution tends to be stickier and will allow the craft foil to stick more readily. But in this case, I was using the alcohol and I stayed with it. And so I'm just allowing those drops to move around and cover as many of those white spots as I can. You could bring in a solvent friendly brush if you want and move it around. You could bring in a straw, which I have sitting in the ready. You could use an airbrush. You could use your finger, which you'll see me use at the very end. But the point really is that the alcohol ink is very malleable. You reactivate it whenever you add isopropyl alcohol or blending solution. And I'm just pointing out there that it's created a nice pool of pigment. And so that allows me then to, again, go back to that wonderful gravity that we enjoy on this big rock and let gravity do its thing and move the ink around. And if you wanted to stop it and say, this is how I want it to look, those drops, the drips are great, then what I would suggest you do is pick up a craft dryer and from a fair distance dry the ink that way. The closer you bring any source of air, the more likely it is that the ink will just get moved around. It'll look very different than the way you wanted it to look. To do a freeze frame on alcohol ink, and there's no guarantee, again, position your drawing tool or whatever it is fairly far back, like a foot or more away from the piece, so that it only has the effect of just drying it more quickly than it ordinarily would. And alcohol ink dries within several seconds. I think Tim Holtz said once it was 7 seconds, but if you've added isopropyl alcohol or an extending like blending solution to it, it's going to, of course, take a little bit longer. And what I'm doing here is just very quickly dabbing my finger into some pools of the ink that haven't quite dried, and I'm dabbing it over the little tiny white places that just aren't getting coverage. And they're probably not getting coverage because there's something on there, a little tiny speck of dust or anything will allow it to resist. I didn't worry about that because it's a background and because it's supposed to be mottled looking, and I don't really care if there's little bits and pieces. But what I did care about is that I can get this deco foil to stick on the tacky places. And so I put it with the colored side up and I apply it. And remember, this ink is still drying, and if you put this foil on too wet, by the way, where the ink is too wet, it'll just pull the ink up and make your foil all inky. So you really, there's a sweet spot. I didn't quite hit it here. There's a few places where the foil adheres, but not incredibly well. It's not like there's big pools of stickiness. And again, back to what I said, the blending solution, there's a few. But the blending solution, instead of the isopropyl alcohol, probably would have allowed the foil to stick in more places. So again, back to my second piece of photo quality paper. This time I'm still using the matte side, but I'm using Cool Piri, which is a Ranger ink, and Amethyst, which is a Marabou ink. And again, the isopropyl alcohol. And if you wanted, you could use blending solution instead, but I apply some to that matte side of the photo quality paper. Then I apply both of these inks, just 2 or 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 drops. And I sort of have an idea of how many will fit, if you will. I don't want to overdo it, but I do want to get some color. And the Piri, the Cool Piri, is a beautiful color. You can see it's a bit bluer than the purple, but it gets covered up fairly quickly. So that's why I put a little bit more of it on. And similar to the background, I'm moving it around and I want the colors to sort of stand out on their own. And I'm going to add some of this gold mixative, which is a metallic. There's a little ball inside which facilitates mixing. You really want to shake it well so that you pull up all of the metallic bits, and I can't remember what the name of it is now, why that escapes me, but anyway, mica. And with the metallics, less is more also. So I've put 3 drops down. You can see that the background has still got quite a bit of the alcohol on it, and blending solution would be fine too, but that's really a must for the metallics, is to have some kind of a solution down. Otherwise it will simply stick and stay in a big blob. So oops, in order to get this to move around. And I don't need it to cover the entire sheet, by the way, because it's only going to be used for the Fright die. And what I'm trying to do is get the mix again of the different colors of purple. That's why I put the Puri in there. And I also want the gold because the gold will reflect, it will look like just light, which I want because I want this Fright die to almost look like it's coming out of the background. And so I'm trying to just move it around a bit so that it dries just slightly. I don't want it to be wet. And again, I'm pointing out that it's going to be used for the die. But back comes the craft foil or deco foil, whatever, that's a brand name. But I'm trying to, yeah, that sticks a bit better. I'm trying to just leave some of the foil residue on this piece so that when I go to die cut it, there's going to be a little bit more shine even than the gold. Now, what happened here was that that piece of foil picked up a bit of the gold, the mica out of the gold in the middle there in the center, so it's not quite as shiny. So, but that can be fixed, and it will. You'll see that in a moment. So this is the background. And what I want to do is to make sure that it is properly sized, which I didn't do properly, but I'll tell you how to do it. Do as I say, not as I do. And so you'll see that I'm going to use 3 scallops, as I pointed out earlier when I was die cutting them. So I'm going to take out some very tiny trimming scissors and also my Fisker trimmer. And I know that the long sides of this need to be cut back about a 1/16 of an inch. I just did a dry fit to see how far the scallops would, whether they fit, the 3 of them, fit along those short sides of the background. And now I've got my little snippers and also by Tim Holtz. You'd think I own shares in his company. I really do not, but just really, really like his products. And I clipped it up so that the end is very nice because the ends are going to be visible. And then again, I'm showing you that 3 will fit. And so I'm snipping off the oh, first I realized, yeah, maybe another 1/16 of an inch has to come off of that long side to make the scallops, the 3 scallops, fit really well. And then I'll go back and snip off that extra scallop, which I'll also place in a small dish because it's just another embellishment and I will use it again, or rather use it in another project. And this just to show you sort of how the cleaned up ends look. If you take little snips and just are very careful about it, you'll get a really nice rounded end. And I'm placing it so that there's a little row of holes that's close to me as we sit here. That's going to sit on top of the edge of the cardstock. You could put, again, you can position it whatever way you want. Now, I'd mentioned earlier I made a bit of a boo-boo. My boo-boo is that although there, oh yeah, everything looks lovely and I dry fit the sides and all of that, I should have put the entire background with the scallops down on this 5 by 6.5 inch card base, which is what I'm using. And ordinarily I would do that. I would dry fit it. In other words, so what I did do was I was quite particular is I took out my little Tim Holtz paper sander and just sanded down the edges. Sometimes there's a little nib or a little, fleck or something. I just like it to be nice and smooth. And I also took out my trusty black marker and I'm going to, because this piece has a white edge or a white core, the background, and it's going to be laying on this black background. What I tend to do with things like that is color the edges the same color as the background. I don't do it if the piece that I'm using as the background is white. I don't give it a color. In this case, because it's a dark purple, I want it to not show the white on the edges. I want it to look as though it is blended right into the background. And it actually gives it even more dimension when we do this, or when I do this. So that's why I took this alcohol marker and just quickly went around the edges. And so here's where I dry fit it but very quickly, only from the perspective of does the background fit. I should have put the scallops on there as well, and I would have noticed that the background was a little bit too long, that those short edges probably needed a 1/16 of an inch off. But that's okay. It at the end of the day, it goes to the very edge, meaning the scallops go to the very edge, but they don't hang over too tremendously much. And you see, I don't use rulers and whatnot. You're welcome to do that if that's your comfort zone. Use rulers to get that background centered up the way you want it. And here's where, this is what I should have done originally, but here's where I position them, and when I put that lower sort of bit of the crocheted piece across the bottom, I realized, oh, okay, it's going to be a little bit too long, but that's okay. I'm using this really amazing Zig 2-way glue pen, and it's 2-way because this goes on wet. It goes on actually a blue color. It dries clear, and it's got this little tiny, tiny tip so I can do these really intricate pieces. I don't cover, by the way, every square millimeter of this cardstock or this die, but I do cover as many bits of it as I can to get as much to adhere. So back to the glue, what it does is it dries clear, and it's sort of tacky. But what happens is that you could leave this. In other words, I could put the glue on and just leave it on my workbench for the rest of the day, come back later, push this die cut down onto a piece of paper, and it will stick. It is the pushing down and the pressure that actually makes this glue stick. It's not the drying. That's the 2-way part of it. So it allows for some flexibility in terms of moving the item around, and it's just a really, really helpful when you've got really tiny little die cuts. So you see where I can tell, oops, the scallop's a little bit too high. I just move it back a bit. And it probably covers a little bit more of the background that I wanted, but just such a like tiny little amount, nobody's going to notice. And then you see I pushed it down with my fingers because that's what really has the effect of helping that glue or the adhesive stick from the die cut to the uh, the card base and also the background. So not to belabor, and of course this is very boring, but for somebody who's not done it before and this might be very new to them, I'm trying to cover as much of that cardstock as possible, particularly like this die cut, particularly around the edges, because if it's going to come up anywhere, it's going to be along the edges. And if there's tiny or very curious hands around, they'll want to pull at it. So I try to have it adhere down as well as I possibly can. And I didn't let the glue dry first. In this case, it was still a little bit wet because I realized, oh, I'm going to have to move those scallops down a bit so that they're not hanging off the edge. But they go right to the very edge, which is just fine. So we're almost at the long part of the stretch, sort of coming down to the finishing touches. This is going to be the die cut for the Fright, which I'm going to use the second piece of photo quality paper, the one with the gold on it. And again, for people who have done die cutting before, this is old hat. My point in showing you this really is that there's a number of places that I could have cut the Fright out. You can see a bit of the purple foil there as well. And I was trying to capture as much of the gold as I could. I still want there to be a fair bit of purple, but I really want the gold to come through because it's what reflects light and really makes a contrast so that you can see those letters coming out from the background. So I knew as I laid it down that I probably was going to have to add a little bit more gold mixative. And I don't, yeah, and here we go. And so what I realize, again, I'm trying to do this as quickly as I can, but that little curly Q on the bottom of the G is going to need some help. So I would just say again, if you're not familiar with doing die cutting, watch out for the little curly Q's and things they can rip off very easily. So you want to be a bit more gentle than what I was. I didn't rip anything and I didn't ruin the die cut, but you'd be wise to have a picking tool like I've got here at the ready. The other thing is the word Fright has an I in it, which has a dot on it. This particular design is great because the dot is a diamond and it's connected to the T. If that's not the case, you want to be sure that you watch where that little dot goes for the I. Quite often they land on the floor or somewhere else on your sleeve if you're wearing a long sleeved top. And so I did a double check to make sure that I knew where it was. And then I lay it down on the background, and this is where I realized, okay, well, it looks okay, but it's not got enough light on it to really show off those letters. So what I want to do is add some more of that gold metallic mixative. And the way I do that is take this Tim Holtz blending tool with a little piece of the alcohol ink cloth on it. It's made for alcohol ink. It's like a felt. And I dropped a couple of drops, probably a couple drops too many, but of the shaken metallic mixative of the gold that I had used already. And then instead of the alcohol, I use alcohol blending solution, and it's an extender. And this is what I was referring to earlier, in that it is also great if you want to have very sticky ink to adhere foil to. So I just put a couple of drops of the extender onto the tool over the ink that I laid down, the gold ink, and I'm very randomly popping that tool around over top of the die cut just so that I can add enough gold to get the highlights that I was really looking for. And you sort of eyeball it, and you can pick it up and try it, see how it looks. Again, this ink dries very, very quickly. And in this case, I happened to stick it down where I had done my gluing, so I had to be very gentle again about pulling that die cut up. And just to show you how much more gold has been added, it did a great job, just that little tool. That's another way, by the way, that you could actually create that piece to cut the Fright from, is you could use that tool with purple and gold on it and just punch it around the, dab it all over the cardstock, the photo quality paper, and then cut it. So there's several ways to do things. There's not just one. And I'm using art glitter glue. It does not have glitter in it. It's formulated specifically though for glitter. For card making, I beg your pardon. It was made for glitter originally, so it dries very, very quickly. You need very little of it. I have a fine tip top on it, and most people use it with the fine tip because you really don't want any more than tiny, tiny little drops, which allows for great adhesion, but it doesn't allow the glue to come sliding out the sides, which it's fine. You can pick up glue with a glue eraser and take it off after the fact. I would prefer not to have the extra step or too much glue to have to remove once I've put it on, so I find that this art glitter glue works really well for me. And so make pretty short work of that, and it will also be stuck to the desk a little bit, but that's okay. And what I'll do is I decide that I should protect the back of the card. I always take a glue eraser to the back of my cards before I send them out. I sign and date the back of my cards, but I also use a glue eraser. If you're not sure what that is, just look it up on Amazon or on the internet. But they're sort of a square, funny looking eraser, but they remove glue really well. And so I laid it down, and again, I was sparing with the glue, but I just used a paper towel to push it down into place so that once I was satisfied that it was laying where I wanted it to. And again, if you want to use a T-square and make sure that everything lines up really straight, of course you should do that. I mostly eyeball things. I don't mind that people realize that it's a handmade card. To me, it's a piece of art, and it's not machine made, so I don't mind that things are a little bit off. And I've taken that bat and bent it so that the middle of the wings are up, and that the tips are bent back and the body is down as well. And the reason why is that I'm going to place the glue in three places only: at the wing tips and in the very center of the body. And what I'm doing here again with this, it's an alcohol ink pen, like a felt pen, but with alcohol ink, is I'm covering up all of the edges that would otherwise look like craft paper. So they reflect light really well, and I want to cover up all those edges so that you can't see them. It just is a nice finish to die cut. So it takes a while, but it's a nice finish. And also, ordinarily, I would cover, in this case, the entire back where that, I'll show you here just a quick demonstration of how I would do that, but I would cover up all that craft paper on the back because the bat is going to be sticking up and dimensional. It could be seen from the sides. If a person sort of poked their head around and looked, they would see the back. It's just a bit cleaner looking if the whole thing is black in behind as well. It happens that this particular metallic paper has a craft backing, so it's brown. You could probably find metallic or other black papers that are all black, and you wouldn't have to edge them or color the black. So I'm going to make the moon. I'm going to make a full moon in this case. It was a crescent moon on the other one. I pulled out the little pumice distress ink, my mini, because pumice works really well for making moons. And I have a watercolor pen with a well or chamber that's got water in it, very handy. And just a little bit of scrap cardstock and a little bit of water. I mist it just a bit with the water, not too much. And if I wanted to, I could mist the whole thing and I could color the whole thing just like I'm going to show you and make probably 16 moons. But in this case, I'm just putting the ink on a craft mat. I couldn't do it on the paper that I had on underneath my project here, but the craft mat allows me then to pick up some of the ink that I've squished onto it with the paintbrush. And then I come back to the paper, the cardstock scrap here, and just dab it, really random. And I dry it quickly because if you might recall, I spritzed it with a bit of water and then I used the water brush. And if I tried to punch it, it's not going to be a very clean punch because the fibers of the paper are wet, so are damp. And even as I did it here, it was probably a little bit too damp, but that's fine. It can be rectified. So I just punched that piece out. I didn't take a piece that was completely covered in that pumice stone ink. I left a little bit of white on there. Now I've taken the brush and just moved the ink around a bit. And the edges I noticed were a little bit rough. And so I just wanted to smooth them out with my finger. And I'm just showing here, if you wanted to cut a crescent, you would put this circle back in about like that and snap, and what the part you couldn't see when I did that would be the crescent, and then you'd be left with a little kind of a funny little oblong piece. In this case, I thought that the full moon was great. I left it with the lighter or whiter side down. That would be where the sun is reflecting from behind this great rock we're on. And I'm placing the bat, yeah, just smoothing the edges. Again, if I'd let the cardstock dry completely before I cut it with the punch, it probably wouldn't have done that. And just a tiny little bead of the art glitter glue to adhere the moon down. Just make sure that's stuck nicely and there's no glue oozing out of that. And then the bat, and as I said, ordinarily I'd have covered the back, but what I do here, because it's this metallic paper, it's coated, I've bent it and I'm showing you the three places where I'm going to adhere it to the card. So the very wing tips and in the body. And those are the only three places that will be stuck down on the card. And so I position it more or less the way I want it, and at a tilt. And then I just use my fingers to push down those three places where the glue is. Now a little bit of glue came out the ends on the tips, so just to avoid having to use the eraser, I will take my little pokey tool here and it dries clear, this glue, but I'm just taking the tool and removing the excess glue right away. It just makes it easier to clean up. And back to my little stash of tiny bats. I'm going to use 3 of them and a little dab of the art glitter glue for the 3 of these fellows, and I just put them in more or less random spots. I didn't refer back to the original card for these. I just put them down where I thought they'd be interesting, and I've got the second one is going to be partly over the moon, which I find is always kind of a neat effect because there's such a contrast between the bat or whatever silhouette you have and the moon. It's kind of nice to have a little bit of overlap. It just highlights it, and I put that bat at a little bit of a different tilt. He's really coming in for a landing. And the third one I'll take and just put it a little bit further down. Somewhat random. You could even cut a bat in half and have just half of it coming in off the edge. That would look very nice too. In this case, again, just for expediency's sake, I thought I would just position them very randomly. And there we have it. And so I'm going to leave you with just a few seconds of the view of the full card. Thanks for joining me. If you enjoyed this video, please hit subscribe, that red button, and also hit the little bell, and that will give you notice once I upload a new video. Thanks again.